Years in Hollywood, when anybody was doing a movie and they needed a villain or a bad guy, somebody who was really despicable, they'd say, why don't you go out and get Lee Van Cleef? He's probably played more villains than any other person in motion pictures.
Lee Van Cleef despised him more than anyone. This wasn't just a rivalry, it was a full-blown feud, a clash that would echo through Hollywood's golden era. But why? What fueled this intense animosity between Van Cleef and John Wayne? In this video, we'll unravel that story, exploring the legacy of a man who became the definitive villain of Westerns, and the unique path that led him there. From early struggles in Hollywood to his rise as a leading actor, Van Cleef's journey was anything but ordinary. Along the way, we'll dive into the legendary feud with John Wayne, uncovering the personal and professional tensions that marked their relationship. We'll also look at Van Cleef's family life, his health battles, and his impact on the Western genre. Born on January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey, Lee Van Cleef's disciplined upbringing and the influence of his father, a watchmaker, played a significant role in shaping the actor's precise and meticulous approach to his craft. Lee Van Cleef was born on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, a small town where values like hard work and discipline ran deep. His early years shaped his approach to life, and it was his father, a watchmaker, who imparted the importance of precision and careful attention to detail. It wasn't just about fixing watches for Van Cleef's father. It was about mastering something with dedication, and that lesson stayed with Lee for the rest of his life. His father's influence created in him a sense of focus and discipline that would later define his acting career, where every movement, every gesture was carefully considered. As a young man, Van Cleef didn't immediately head to Hollywood. Instead, like many of his generation, he answered the call to serve during World War II. He enlisted in the U.S. Navy, where he worked as a radio operator. His time in the military wasn't just a chapter in his life, it was a transformative experience that shaped much of the characters he would later portray. The hardships of war hardened him, giving him an edge that would become a signature part of his on-screen persona. This sense of toughness, the no-nonsense attitude, and the quiet, steely resolve would become hallmarks of his acting style, especially in the westerns and action films he would come to be known for. After the war, Van Cleef returned home and made a decision that would alter the course of his life. He attended the University of South Carolina, with plans to pursue a degree in engineering. However, a different path called to him. The world of acting, with its lights, cameras, and drama, beckoned, and despite the practicality of engineering, Van Cleef made the bold choice to follow his passion. He left his studies behind and set his sights on Hollywood. Arriving in Tinseltown, Van Cleef's journey was not one of immediate success. He started in small, uncredited roles, often playing military men or cowboys, but he was just a face in the crowd. His early performances didn't stand out, but they laid the foundation for the man he would become. Despite facing these early setbacks, the rugged look that had served him well in the Navy and the discipline he'd learned from his father were starting to set him apart. Still, Hollywood wasn't ready to fully embrace him yet. When Lee Van Cleef first arrived in Hollywood, the road ahead was anything but glamorous. He wasn't immediately cast in lead roles or high-profile projects. Instead, he began his career by taking on small, often uncredited parts in films and television shows. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was work. For a while, he was the face that audiences would recognize in brief moments on screen, playing minor characters that didn't leave much of an impression. His first notable role came in High Noon, 1952, where he played a silent, menacing henchman. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and it showcased the sharp, cold intensity in his demeanor that would later define his career. Despite this small role, Van Cleef soon found himself relegated to a particular type of character. He was cast as military personnel, cowboys, or henchmen, always the secondary figure, never the hero. Hollywood didn't quite know what to do with him. He had the look of a man who could play the villain, but it seemed like that's all he was ever going to be. His sharp features, piercing eyes, and angular face made him perfect for these tough, often villainous roles. But as his early career progressed, he found himself boxed in by these types. Van Cleef was frustrated. He wanted more than just to be the guy who got the bad guy or played a cold-hearted outlaw. His struggle with typecasting was compounded by personal challenges. Just as his career was beginning to take shape, a car accident in the mid-1950s nearly derailed everything. The accident left him with serious injuries that required significant recovery time. For a man who had built a reputation on playing tough, rugged characters, this was a devastating setback. It wasn't just the physical toll of the accident. The incident also placed a temporary halt to his career. For a while, it seemed like Van Cleef might be forgotten, another actor lost to the ebb and flow of Hollywood's relentless demand for fresh faces. But Van Cleef wasn't the kind to give up easily. He wasn't about to let a car accident or the constant struggle to break free from the typecasting that plagued him end his career. Despite the setbacks, he pressed on, continuing to take whatever roles he could. But no matter how many parts he played, he couldn't seem to shake the label of villain. This frustration would stick with him for years, as he watched other actors around him land lead roles and gain fame, while he remained stuck in the shadow of Hollywood's expectations. His career was stagnating, and it seemed like the dream he had worked so hard to achieve was slipping further away. In the midst of these personal and professional struggles, Van Cleef had to face the fact that if he wanted a chance to break out, he would have to fight for it. He began refining his craft, working harder to perfect his characters and bring more depth to the roles he was offered. But no matter how much he prepared, the industry wasn't giving him much to work with. The frustration mounted, and for a time, it seemed like his path to fame would remain out of reach. It was a tough period, full of uncertainty, but it would eventually lead to something much bigger, a turning point that would set the stage for his eventual rise as one of Hollywood's most iconic actors in the Western genre. In 1965, Lee Van Cleef's career took a dramatic turn. For years, he had struggled to escape the shadow of typecasting, but it was the visionary director Sergio Leone who would finally help him break free. It all began with For a Few Dollars More, 1965, where Van Cleef was cast as a cunning and ruthless outlaw named Colonel Douglas Mortimer. The role was a significant step forward in his career, but it was his next project with Leone, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, that truly solidified his place in cinematic history. In The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Van Cleef portrayed Angel Eyes, a cold-blooded bounty hunter who would become one of the most iconic villains in film history. What made this role so special was the depth and complexity that Van Cleef brought to the character. Unlike the one-dimensional villains of previous years, Angel Eyes was more than just a ruthless killer. He had his own code, his own sense of morality, one that was detached from the law and society's expectations. The character's calm demeanor, mixed with an underlying menace, created a presence on screen that was chilling and captivating. It was a performance that showcased Van Cleef's ability to take what could have been a simple antagonist and turn him into something far more complex. This role was the catalyst for Van Cleef's rise to fame, but it wasn't just luck or timing. His ability to embody these morally ambiguous characters in a way that felt both authentic and compelling helped redefine the way villains were portrayed in Westerns. Van Cleef's portrayal of Angel Eyes didn't just make him a star, it set a new standard for the Western genre. His character wasn't just evil for the sake of it. He was driven by a personal code, and that added a layer of intrigue that had been lacking in previous Western villains. Following the success of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Van Cleef's career continued to soar. He starred in another of Leone's films, For a Few Dollars More, as Colonel Mortimer, a man with a mysterious past who seeks justice in his own way. Mortimer's character was a far cry from the stereotypical all-good hero of many Westerns. Instead, he was a man with flaws and complexities, driven by vengeance, yet holding on to a sense of honor. Van Cleef excelled at playing these layered characters, and audiences quickly took notice. They weren't just villains. They were men caught in their own moral dilemmas, grappling with their personal codes in a lawless world. Van Cleef's transformation from a typecast villain to a respected leading man was a testament to his skill and versatility. He had the ability to make his characters stand out, even when they were on the wrong side of the law. It was this ability to inject humanity into these flawed, complex characters that turned him into one of the most memorable figures in Western cinema. His work in the spaghetti westerns, films that pushed the boundaries of the genre, cemented his place in film history as a master of portraying the morally complex yet unforgettable anti-hero. Lee Van Cleef quickly became synonymous with the Western genre, not just as a character actor, but as an icon in his own right. His intense performances, coupled with his striking, rugged appearance, made him a natural fit for roles that demanded menace and complexity. With his sharp features, piercing eyes, and stoic demeanor, Van Cleef had the perfect look for a villain. But it wasn't just his appearance that made him memorable. It was his ability to bring depth to his characters, transforming them from one-dimensional antagonists into figures that audiences couldn't forget. In the world of Westerns, villains often had one job: to be the bad guy. But Van Cleef changed that. He redefined what it meant to be a villain. His characters weren't just evil for the sake of it. They were complex, driven by personal codes and motivations that made them more than mere obstacles for the heroes to overcome. His portrayal of Angel Eyes in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was a prime example of this. While he was undoubtedly the antagonist, Van Cleef's performance elevated him beyond the usual villain. He made Angel Eyes a character with layers, someone who had his own moral code, however warped it may have been. This was a shift in the genre, one that gave more depth to the antagonist and helped reshape the entire landscape of Western films. The success of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly had a profound impact on Western cinema. Van Cleef's portrayal of the cold, calculating bounty hunter was one of the standout performances in the film, and it became a defining moment in his career. It wasn't just his looks or his ability to intimidate, it was the subtlety in his performance that made him so memorable. His intense gaze, his ability to convey menace without saying much, and his calm, controlled demeanor made him one of the most iconic figures in Western cinema. He didn't need to speak loudly to be heard. His presence alone was enough to make an impact, and that left audiences captivated. Van Cleef's influence extended far beyond The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. In The Big Gun Down, 1966, he played a bounty hunter chasing down a dangerous criminal. And once again, his character was defined by the internal conflict and personal code that drove him. This film solidified Van Cleef's reputation as one of the most reliable actors in the Western genre, capable of bringing depth to even the most morally ambiguous roles. His portrayal of men who walked the fine line between good and evil helped establish a new kind of anti-hero in Westerns, one who wasn't entirely virtuous, but still had a sense of honor. This shift in character development was something that set him apart from his contemporaries. In Death Rides, A Horse, 1967, Van Cleef's character was yet another example of the layered, morally complex figures he portrayed so well. In this film, He played an aging gunslinger seeking revenge for the murder of his family. What made his character stand out wasn't just his quest for vengeance, it was the depth of emotion behind it. Van Cleef's portrayal of a man who had lived through years of hardship and loss added a tragic dimension to the film. He wasn't just a cold-blooded killer. He was a man scarred by his past, trying to reconcile the man he had become with the person he once was. This depth of character helped Van Cleef become a staple in the Western genre, particularly in films that explored the more complex, morally gray areas of the Wild West. In A Minute to Pray, A Second to Die, 1968, Van Cleef again took on the role of a man trapped between two worlds, one in which he had to confront his past sins, and one where he had to navigate the dangerous world of criminals and lawmen. The film added yet another layer to his already impressive range as an actor, showcasing his ability to play characters that were both hardened and vulnerable, ruthless yet searching for redemption. It was in these films that Van Cleef truly solidified his place as a Western legend, transitioning from supporting roles to leading man status. He wasn't just a villain anymore. He was the central figure, the man audiences wanted to see, whether he was playing a gunslinger, an outlaw, or a lawman. Van Cleef's career trajectory was a testament to his skill as an actor. While he had started out in smaller, often uncredited roles, by the late 1960s, he had become one of the most respected figures in the Western genre. His transition from supporting roles to leading man was a crucial turning point, and it was through films like For a Few Dollars More, Death Rides a Horse, and A Minute to Pray, A Second to Die that Van Cleef truly became a household name in the Western world. What set him apart from his peers was his ability to play a range of complex characters, each one more nuanced than the last. He wasn't just a typical hero or villain. He was something in between, a character defined by his personal codes and struggles rather than simple morality. In the years following his rise to fame, Van Cleef continued to be a dominant force in Western cinema. His performances in these films not only helped to elevate his own career, but also had a lasting impact on the genre itself. By portraying villains who weren't just bad for the sake of being bad, he helped redefine the way Westerns were made and how characters were written. His legacy in Western cinema is undeniable, and he remains one of the most influential figures in the genre. A man whose intense presence and complex portrayals of morally ambiguous characters reshaped the Western and elevated it to new heights. As the 1970s and 1980s arrived, Lee Van Cleef began to expand his horizons, moving beyond the Western genre that had defined his early career. With his established presence and undeniable talent, he was ready to tackle new challenges and reach new audiences. The action film boom of the 1980s offered him the perfect opportunity to reinvent himself, and he didn't hesitate to seize it. One of Van Cleef's most notable roles during this period was in Escape from New York, 1981, a film that became a cult classic. Directed by John Carpenter, the film starred Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken, but Van Cleef's portrayal of the ruthless, menacing officer who works behind the scenes was unforgettable. His commanding presence and sharp delivery made him a perfect fit for this action-packed dystopian world. Van Cleef's ability to play menacing, no-nonsense characters translated seamlessly from Westerns to the world of action films, where he could still embody the hard-edged, tough guy persona audiences had come to expect from him. In The Octagon, 1980, Van Cleef once again embraced the role of a tough, commanding character. This time, he starred alongside martial arts icon Chuck Norris in a film that blended action with elements of the martial arts genre. Van Cleef's character, a man caught in a web of dangerous intrigue, was just as cold and calculating as the villains he portrayed in his westerns, but with a contemporary, high-stakes twist. These roles marked a shift in his career, allowing him to tap into a new genre and continue his relevance in Hollywood. What made Van Cleef's transition into action films so successful was his ability to adapt. While many actors from the 1960s and 1970s struggled to stay relevant as tastes in cinema shifted, Van Cleef was able to seamlessly move into new genres without losing his distinctive style. Whether in gritty action films or high-octane thrillers, he brought the same level of intensity and menace to his roles, earning him new fans and solidifying his place as one of the most versatile actors of his era. He proved that, despite the changing landscape of Hollywood, he still had the chops to captivate audiences and deliver memorable performances. But Van Cleef's talents weren't confined to the silver screen. In the 1980s, he also made a successful foray into television, further expanding his career and solidifying his place as a beloved figure in popular culture. One of his most notable television roles was in The Master, 1984, a martial arts-themed series in which he starred alongside Timothy Van Patten. Van Cleef's character, a skilled martial artist and tough-as-nails hero, marked another transformation in his career. The show allowed him to once again showcase his ability to portray hard-edged, commanding figures. But it also highlighted a new side of his talent, his ability to adapt to the small screen. The Master ran for a single season, but it left a lasting impact on fans, especially those who had followed his career through westerns and action films. The role showed that Van Cleef wasn't just a Western icon, he was a versatile actor capable of thriving in different mediums. His transition to television was not only a testament to his acting range, but also a reflection of his ability to stay relevant in an ever-changing entertainment landscape. These television roles, along with his continued success in action films, helped to solidify Van Cleef's lasting fame. Even as his big-screen roles began to taper off, his presence on television kept him in the public eye, ensuring that his legacy would live on. Van Cleef's career wasn't just about the films he made, it was about his ability to reinvent himself, to continue adapting to new trends in entertainment, and to always bring his signature intensity to whatever role he played. From westerns to action films to television, Lee Van Cleef's versatility was a key factor in his long-lasting success in Hollywood. In many ways, his later career marked the culmination of decades of hard work, proving that he was more than just a one-trick pony. He had successfully navigated the evolution of Hollywood and continued to leave his mark, not just as a Western star, but as a dynamic force in multiple genres. His ability to thrive in both the action film and television worlds ensured that his place in the pantheon of Hollywood legends would never be in doubt. Lee Van Cleef's personal life was as complex as the characters he portrayed on screen. Behind the tough exterior and intense performances, Van Cleef was also a family man, facing the same challenges many working actors face when balancing personal and professional lives. In 1943, at the age of 18, Van Cleef married Patty Ruth Cale, and together they had 3 children, David, Alan, and Deborah. For the next 15 years, Van Cleef's career as an actor began to take off, but so did the demands of his work. Hollywood's grind and constant travel made it difficult to maintain a stable family life. Despite the shared joys of raising their children, the pressures of the industry took their toll. And in 1958, after 15 years of marriage, the couple divorced. The divorce marked a significant turning point in Van Cleef's life, both personally and professionally. At this stage, his career was facing some struggles, and the split added to the emotional weight of the time. Though his star was beginning to rise, particularly after his breakout roles in the 1960s, the personal toll of his failed marriage lingered. Yet, as is often the case with Van Cleef's own characters, he proved to be resilient and soon he would find the support he needed to elevate both his personal life and his career. In 1960, just 2 years after his divorce, Van Cleef married Joan Marguerite Doctorow. This new chapter in his life coincided with one of the most important periods in his career. The early 1960s were when Van Cleef's reputation was beginning to grow, and Joan was a steadfast partner during his rise to fame. While Van Cleef was transforming from a character actor to a leading man, Joan played a crucial role in supporting him through this transitional period. Her encouragement and stability were key factors as he took on the defining roles in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns, a career-defining move that would see him become one of the most recognizable faces in Western cinema. Joan's support was invaluable as Van Cleef faced the ups and downs of the industry, navigating the challenges of fame while striving for greater roles. Their marriage, though full of shared successes, would also face its challenges. After 14 years together, the couple divorced in 1974. While it marked the end of another significant personal relationship for Van Cleef, it also allowed him the opportunity to move forward, both in his personal life and his career. This period of his life proved once again that, like the tough, weathered characters he portrayed, Van Cleef could endure hardship and reinvent himself in the face of adversity. His third marriage, to Barbara Havalone in 1976, would bring him much-needed stability. By this time, Van Cleef was entering his later years, and his health was starting to decline. Barbara, however, was a constant source of support. Together, they weathered the challenges that come with aging, and Barbara stood by his side as his health issues began to affect his ability to continue working at the pace he once had. Through heart problems and complications from past injuries, Barbara's unwavering presence was a key factor in Van Cleef's ability to cope with the physical toll of his long career. In his later years, Van Cleef's career began to slow down as the industry shifted. His health issues were mounting, but Barbara's support gave him the stability he needed to handle the inevitable decline that comes with aging. Though he wasn't as active in films or television as he had been in his prime, his legacy as one of the greats of Western cinema remained intact. Barbara remained by his side until his death, and their marriage of 13 years provided him with a sense of peace and personal fulfillment in his final years. Van Cleef's personal life, though marked by divorces and the struggles of balancing a high-profile career with family commitments, also showed his resilience. Each chapter in his personal life brought new challenges, but also new opportunities for growth. His third marriage to Barbara allowed him to live out his final years in relative peace, knowing he had someone who would stand by him no matter what. It was in this sense of stability that Van Cleef could quietly exit the limelight, leaving behind a career that had defined an era of cinema and an indelible mark on Hollywood history. Van Cleef's family life and relationships remind us that, much like his iconic roles, he was a man of complexity, navigating personal struggles and triumphs in much the same way he navigated the morally gray worlds of his characters. His enduring legacy in Hollywood wasn't just shaped by his screen presence, but also by the quiet strength he exhibited in his personal life, especially in the final years when he found peace with Barbara and the family he had built. Lee Van Cleef's career wasn't just shaped by his on-screen performances, but also by the personal challenges he faced behind the scenes. Despite his tough guy persona, his life was marked by physical struggles and health issues that would alter the course of both his career and personal life. One of the most significant obstacles Van Cleef encountered was a car accident that occurred early in his career. The accident left him with serious injuries that required extensive recovery. For an actor who had made his mark playing tough, rugged characters, this was a difficult setback. The accident didn't just put a halt to his acting schedule, it also tested his resilience. In the midst of the physical and emotional toll, Van Cleef was forced to step back and reassess his future in Hollywood. The accident became a reminder that even the most hardened characters on screen could face vulnerability in real life, and it underscored the deep contrast between his on-screen toughness and the realities of his personal struggles. In addition to the car accident, Van Cleef faced a series of health problems throughout his life. As he aged, he developed heart issues that gradually became more pronounced. These health complications were a constant challenge, and by the 1970s, they began to affect his ability to perform at the level he once did. Despite these setbacks, Van Cleef continued to work in Hollywood, demonstrating the same determination and tenacity that had made him a star in the first place. But as the years wore on, the toll on his body became more evident, and his presence on screen began to diminish as he struggled with his health. However, the most symbolic of his personal challenges came in a far more intimate and deeply human moment: the loss of part of his finger. While building a playhouse for his daughter, Deborah, Van Cleef suffered a serious injury, losing the last joint of his right-hand middle finger. For many, this would have been a career-ending injury, especially for an actor whose persona was built on physical toughness. But Van Cleef didn't let this injury derail his career. He continued acting, but the loss of his finger became an undeniable symbol of the dual nature of his life. To the public, he was the tough, cold-blooded bounty hunter, the villain with the sharp, calculating edge. But in his private life, he was a devoted father, willing to sacrifice his own well-being for the happiness of his children. The Playhouse incident not only revealed his vulnerability, but also his devotion to his family. He was, after all, just as much a father as he was a legendary actor, and that sacrifice spoke volumes about the man behind the camera. The injury to his finger also became a part of his public persona, though not in a way that hindered his career. Rather, it added to the aura of the tough guy image he had so carefully crafted. The fact that he could continue to work despite this injury showcased his strength and determination. He wasn't just playing hard men on screen, he embodied that same resilience in his real life. It became a quiet testament to his ability to endure, to push through pain, and to remain steadfast in the face of adversity. For those who knew him, the loss of his finger was a reminder of the personal sacrifices he made, not just for his career, but for his family as well. Van Cleef's physical struggles were a constant presence throughout his life, and they were part of the reason his performances had such a raw, authentic quality. When you watched him play a character, whether a villain or an anti-hero, you could feel that his toughness wasn't just an act, it was part of who he was. The challenges he faced off-screen only served to deepen his portrayal of the men he played. His vulnerability, however, was often hidden behind a tough exterior, making it all the more powerful when it did emerge. It wasn't just his acting that made him so memorable. It was the way he channeled his personal experiences and struggles into his characters, making them feel both real and relatable. In the end, Lee Van Cleef's health issues and the personal challenges he faced didn't define him. What defined him was his ability to continue working through adversity, his unwavering commitment to his craft, and the way he balanced his on-screen toughness with his devotion to his family. The loss of his finger, the car accident, and the heart problems all became part of the fabric of who Van Cleef was, a man who faced difficulties with the same determination he brought to his roles, never allowing them to stop him from pursuing his passion. These struggles didn't break him. They only added depth to the legendary figure who left an indelible mark on Hollywood. Lee Van Cleef's disdain for John Wayne wasn't just a product of Hollywood competition. It went far deeper. What started as a professional rivalry quickly became a personal feud, that shaped much of Van Cleef's career and legacy. While both men were legends in their own right, their contrasting approaches to acting, their political beliefs, and their differing views on what the American West represented set them on a collision course that would last throughout their careers. One of the most significant differences between the two was their approach to acting. Van Cleef was a method actor, known for diving deeply into the psychology of his characters. He believed in understanding every nuance, every flaw of the role he was playing. His characters were often complex, layered, and morally ambiguous, reflecting the gray areas of human nature. In contrast, John Wayne's acting style was rooted in a more traditional, one-dimensional approach. He often portrayed the archetypal cowboy, the brave, stoic hero with unwavering principles. To Van Cleef, this reliance on a single persona was a sign of complacency. He felt that Wayne's success wasn't a result of raw talent, but of a carefully constructed image that resonated with audiences. In essence, Van Cleef believed that Wayne's appeal was more about image and less about the depth and range that he himself brought to the screen. This fundamental difference in acting style was just the surface of their rivalry. Underneath, their political and ideological beliefs also played a crucial role in the tension between them. John Wayne was a staunch conservative, known for his vocal support of traditional American values and his unyielding patriotism. He was an outspoken defender of the Vietnam War and the American way of life, advocating for the ideals of rugged individualism and military strength. Van Cleef, on the other hand, was more aligned with progressive ideals. He embraced the counterculture movement of the 1960s, rejecting the notion of blind nationalism and the glorification of militarism. While Van Cleef never made his political views as public as Wayne, it was clear that he leaned toward a more nuanced, critical view of American exceptionalism. This ideological divide between the two men created a bitter undercurrent in their interactions, with each viewing the other's worldview as outdated or misguided. Beyond their ideological differences, the two actors also found themselves in competition for dominance within the Western genre. John Wayne was the quintessential hero of traditional American Westerns, embodying the ideals of the Old West, with his clear-cut portrayal of good versus evil. Wayne's films often followed a simple formula: the strong, silent man who upholds justice in a world that rewards strength and honor. Van Cleef, however, became famous for portraying characters who were more complicated, more morally gray. His roles were often those of outlaws or antiheroes, characters who didn't fit neatly into the box of right or wrong. Where Wayne represented the old guard of the American Western, Van Cleef's characters were more reflective of the complexities of the modern world. Excelled in villainous roles, but lacked the charisma and stature to become a leading man in Hollywood. Van Cleef, in turn, viewed Wayne as a symbol of everything he despised about the traditional Hollywood system, a system that prioritized image and box office appeal over the depth and complexity that he himself brought to his roles. At the heart of their feud was a fundamental clash of values. Van Cleef saw Wayne as a representation of the sanitized, idealized version of the American West, one where the good guys always won and the bad guys were clearly defined. For Van Cleef, this portrayal was not only unrealistic, but it also ignored the moral complexities and the darker aspects of the real world. He believed that the American West wasn't simply a place of good versus evil. It was a place where survival often depended on navigating the gray areas between right and wrong. To him, Wayne's portrayal of the cowboy hero as the unflinching moral center of the frontier was a distorted, simplistic view that ignored the complexities of history. While their feud never became a public spectacle in the way some Hollywood rivalries do, it simmered beneath the surface for years, affecting both men's careers and personal lives. They were both legends of the Western genre, but their rivalry highlighted the deeper divisions in Hollywood at the time. Divisions between old-school stars like Wayne, who represented traditional values, and a new wave of actors like Van Cleef, who sought to bring more complexity and realism to their roles. Ultimately, their relationship was a battle not just for dominance in the Western genre, but for the soul of the American cinema that both men helped to shape. In the end, John Wayne and Lee Van Cleef were both icons, but their rivalry has become a defining part of their legacy. While Wayne's image as the noble cowboy hero remains etched in the minds of audiences, Van Cleef's portrayal of the morally ambiguous, complex anti-hero has left an equally significant mark on the genre. Their feud, born out of differing beliefs about the American West and how it should be portrayed, was as much a clash of ideologies as it was a personal rivalry. And it's a rivalry that continues to fascinate film fans and historians alike. In the 1980s, Lee Van Cleef's presence in Hollywood began to fade as the industry shifted. As his health started to decline, his appearances became less frequent. While he had carved out a legendary place in cinema history, the physical toll of years of acting, coupled with health issues, gradually led him to step away from the spotlight. By this time, Van Cleef had already cemented his legacy as one of the most iconic figures in the Western genre. Yet, as the 1980s wore on, his roles became fewer, and he focused more on his personal life, dealing with the heart problems that had plagued him for years. Despite his declining health, Van Cleef's reputation remained strong. He was, and would always be, a legend in the world of westerns and action films. Sadly, Van Cleef passed away on December 16, 1989, at the age of 64, due to a heart attack. His death marked the end of an era for the Western genre, as he was one of the last of a generation of actors who had helped define the classic style of the genre. His passing left a void in Hollywood, but his contributions to the film world continue to be celebrated to this day. Though his time in the limelight had slowed down in his later years, the mark he left on cinema was undeniable. Van Cleef's legacy is not just in the roles he played, but in the way he shaped the portrayal of villains and anti-heroes in Western films. Before his influence, villains in Westerns were often one-dimensional and lacked depth. Van Cleef brought a new level of complexity to these roles, turning antagonists into characters who could be both feared and understood. His performances in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and For a Few Dollars More, raised the bar for what it meant to play a villain. Rather than simply being evil for evil's sake, his characters often followed their own moral codes, which made them more intriguing and multifaceted. They weren't just obstacles for the hero to overcome. They were fully realized, sometimes tragic characters with motivations and personal struggles that made them more human. Van Cleef's impact on spaghetti westerns is particularly profound. He helped redefine the genre, which had become known for its darker, grittier take on the American West. In contrast to the traditional heroic portrayals of westerns seen in Hollywood, the spaghetti westerns, led by directors like Sergio Leone, embraced a more morally ambiguous vision. Van Cleef's roles in these films were central to this shift. He wasn't just the villain. He was the man who represented the complexities of the human condition in a world that was anything but black and white. His characters were often driven by personal codes of honor, even when they operated outside the law, giving depth to the genre and resonating with audiences in a way that many other westerns had not. In the years following his death, Van Cleef's contributions to the genre have only grown in stature. Filmmakers and actors alike have recognized his influence, with many drawing inspiration from his performances in their own work. He showed future generations of actors that villains didn't have to be caricatures. They could be as compelling as the heroes, and just as complex. His work has inspired not only those who sought to continue the tradition of the Western, but also actors in action films who admired his ability to convey menace with a minimal amount of dialogue. The cold, calculating villains he portrayed in films like Escape from New York and The Octagon have become templates for action antagonists in the decades that followed. More than just an actor, Lee Van Cleef was a master of his craft. His ability to portray characters that were at once menacing and empathetic set him apart in the world of westerns and action films. He redefined the role of the villain, adding layers of complexity that had not been seen before in the genre. His work in spaghetti westerns, particularly in films directed by Sergio Leone, helped bring a fresh, dynamic approach to the genre. Van Cleef's influence is still felt today, as new generations of filmmakers and actors look back at his films for inspiration. Though his time in the spotlight was limited, the imprint of Van Cleef's work remains lasting. His name is synonymous with the Western genre, and his contribution to the portrayal of morally ambiguous characters continues to inspire countless stories, performances, and filmmakers. Whether he was playing a ruthless bounty hunter or an aging gunslinger seeking redemption, Van Cleef brought depth and authenticity to his roles. He remains a definitive figure in cinematic history, and his legacy as one of the greats of Western cinema is secure. Lee Van Cleef's place in cinematic history is undeniable. His career is a testament to the power of perseverance and reinvention, showing that an actor can transcend typecasting and become an icon. Through every role, Van Cleef demonstrated a unique ability to bring depth and complexity to his characters, elevating the villain into something much more than a simple antagonist. He wasn't just a man of action or menace, he was a master of his craft, skillfully crafting performances that resonated with audiences long after the screen went dark. Lee Van Cleef's legacy lives on not only through his unforgettable roles, but also through the bold, challenging performances he brought to life. He wasn't just the villain, he was a true artist who redefined what it meant to play the anti-hero. Now, it's time to revisit his films and rediscover the magic he brought to the screen. What are your favorite Lee Van Cleef roles? How do you view his rivalry with John Wayne? Share your thoughts in the comments below and continue the conversation about one of cinema's most enduring legends.